So hello and welcome to this new series I'm going to be calling Podcast-ish, because it's kind of like a podcast but kind of not. Basically it's going to be kind of short, 10 at most probably 20 minutes, and I'm just going to kind of talk about stuff I find interesting and I think other people find interesting. I love the sound of my own voice, that's mainly the reason for it, but I mean if you prefer gameplay in the background for the next one I can do that. For this it's probably just going to be images and stuff, but yeah, it's just going to be kind of be a chill series. That's about it. Oh yeah, and if you have any suggestions on something you might want me to do in the future, just leave them in the comments. I might even do it with some people. But anyways, we'll get into it from the title you already know, this is going to be about the problem with looter shooters. And the reason I kind of stumbled upon this topic is because there's two looter shooters that came out recently. I'm thinking about getting or not, but they haven't been doing that well in the first couple of months, especially since they're coming from two very established game companies. But before we get into why that might be, we're going to have to go over what looter shooters are. So looter shooters are FPS games, usually third person, where as you progress from the start of the game to the end game, you can gain loot or weapons, depending on the game, really it can be anything. You gain them from enemies or bosses defeated. They're similar to an RPG type where you get more powerful as you go on, where it's less about the skill and more about the equipment, weapons, armor, whatever you have. And these games normally are very long, they take long amounts of time to complete, and they're pretty repetitive, which I think might be one of the problems behind why the two recent games aren't doing too well. But anyways, when it comes to these games, it's kind of hard to exactly tell, how they're going to do, just because they're really diverse. You have some more story-based, some more RPG-based where you just go through, and while these games are very similar, just like the Battle Royale genre, there's a lot of variety in kind of the different types of games. And that kind of brings us to our two examples today, which are very different besides the fact that they're looter shooters. The first is Anthem, the new game. You fly around in robot Iron Man suits on an alien world and fight giant monsters. And this game, it's made by EA, part of that at least, and it's kind of similar. It gives me Destiny vibes, but it's kind of that futuristic game, class-based, and it seems like a lot of fun, on the outside at least. The other game is Tom Clancy's The Division 2, which this is a game I'm really surprised isn't doing well, but if there's one thing Rainbow taught us, it's that Tom Clancy game doesn't have to do that well at the start to be popular. You look at a game that came out like 4 years ago, now it's up to about 40 million players, and that's growing every day. So, The Division is another class-based game, takes place in Washington, D.C. after a biochemical whatever outbreak, and it's kind of taking back the city. And this one does seem more interesting, at least from a story aspect, where Anthem's more like giant aliens, gods of creation. I'm kind of more interested in that, like the deep, taking back a city, more small-scale aspect of it. And then, because also in those games, like small-scale games, you get kind of more of a feel for the story and stuff like that. But so I think one of the biggest and first problems in these games is they don't often have a story. And that's not true for every game, but in The Division, you do have a story, you don't learn about your characters. And that's the main thing that kind of I care about in video game stories, kind of getting to know the characters, having enjoyable characters. That's one of the best parts. And in Anthem and The Division, yeah, you play as the characters, but they don't really have personalities, at least from what I've seen. Do note that I'm going off a secondhand information from friends that have got the game, and also kind of, I stayed away from reviews, but I did look at a couple of them just for gameplay and information. But even though you have a story, you don't go super in-depth with the characters, which I think for a game to be good, it either has to have a good story, considering games like Red Dead Redemption, the Destiny franchise. I guess Destiny doesn't have the best story, but you get the point. or they have to have really good gameplay. The Battle Royale games, PUBG, Fortnite, Apex Legends, and then also more strategical games with really fun gameplay, like Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, kind of the big coming up guy. And this is one thing that I feel like looter shooters don't have enough story, but their gameplay can tend to be even worse. And what I mean is the gameplay is just kind of boring compared to other games. So, the main reason for this, I believe, is you're going against bots. Now, if you look at a game like Fortnite, there's tons of room to improve in the game and your skill, with all the building elements, stuff like that, and there's really not that much of a skill gap when you first start the game. You can keep getting better and better and better for a while. But then also in that game, every game's going to be different with the RNG aspect, stuff like that, weapons you get. While most fights are going to be similar and after a while it does get repetitive, it's mostly going to be the same. And then on the other end of the spectrum, games like Rainbow, each match you're going to be on a different map with different teammates. Those teammates are going to be picking different operators with different loadouts. You have a whole different combinations of gadgets, and even the littlest things like where one of your teammates places a reinforcement can completely change how that match goes down. So that's something where these two games, they're not that repetitive. Now, keep in mind, Battle Royale genre does get repetitive after a while, but those games aren't really that repetitive. While in looter shooters, as time goes on, there's not really a skill gap. How good you do depends on how good your weapons are. So as you go on, besides changes in the map, changes in the enemy's difficulty, and the changing in your own character, how powerful they are at least, it gets pretty repetitive, because if you're going against easy enemies with low-powered weapons, it's going to feel almost exactly the same, just a little less epic, than going against high-powered enemies with high-powered weapons. And I think that's the biggest problem, where when you're going against bots, it's just going to get repetitive. There's not much variety in the game. And I think that's one of the biggest things that drives people away from looter shooters, or at least stops them from finishing them, is that kind of knowledge, or that feeling of this is just the same thing over and over again. And I think the games do kind of good jobs, Anthem and Division, in mixing it up, where in Anthem you have different classes you can try out, all with different abilities. In the Division, you also have the different classes, but then you have the different kind of maps, different missions, like saving the Constitution, all that stuff. But going against bots is still going against bots, and it's never going to be as fun as going against other people. And, I mean, the only interaction with other people you're going to have in these games, as far as I know, in the kind of the starting of the game, I know Anthem does have multiplayer later on, but even when you're playing with friends, it's still not the same as going against other people on a regular basis, because what if your friends aren't on? Then you're alone, you don't have anyone to talk through, and you can just kind of get bored. Like, it's just boring without friends. I think most video games are. And that's one of the problems, where when people think of gamers, they think of people just sitting on the couches alone all day, when really you're interacting with up to maybe hundreds of different people, come from different backgrounds with different stories each day. And you're playing with all these different people, which I think is one of the biggest parts of these games. I have one friend in Siege, he met a kid that lives in Washington, and then us three play together regularly, and that's kind of something really cool that you can't get from just going out or about in the neighborhood, but you also can't get from just playing a video game by yourself, or only playing with people that you're already friends with, not getting to meet anyone new on the game. So, I think that's a big problem, but then you go into, and I think this problem is mainly in Anthem, where you have the same character, same abilities and stuff, going against enemies with huge health pools, that since you're flying, they can't even fight back. Now, in the Division, you do have, like, the really chunky guys, and you have a whole plethora of gadgets and weapons that look amazing, that you can just mess around with. to take these guys out. And with friends, that can be fun, but without them, it's just kind of boring going against giant enemies with huge health pools when they can't do much to you. And then it can also get frustrating if on some levels when you're just swarmed with enemies, if you can't get past them. Like my biggest problem with RPGs and stuff like that is when you get stuck on one level and you just continuously lose. And the thing in those games, if you don't get past that level, you can't move on. Where in Fortnite or Rainbow, you can get matched up against extremely skilled people and just get absolutely destroyed. But then, next game, you're not against those people. So it's not as much of a problem. Where in these games, you go against a hard level, hard enemy, you can't get past it. You're stuck on them until you either grind enough to get better gear, or you come up with some cheap way or cheap strategy of taking out the enemy. And that's another problem where not only are they repetitive, but sometimes it's the core gameplay is boring. And another thing is, once you get to the end game, that seems like you have everything in the game to experiment with. But after a while, that's going to get boring too. And it is smart for games to add the DLC and stuff like that. And that will help. But it's still not going to be the same. And I think the biggest thing that keeps people playing these games is the feeling of, I leveled up. Something like that. And once you get to the end game, you don't really get that feeling anymore. It's just the same stuff. You're too good for everything. It's just that kind of thing. And there's not much you can do to fix this, unless we go back to the first point, which is you're going against boss. And I think the main way to make looter shooters more fun is have a multiplayer. Not a multiplayer where everything's like kind of evenly balanced, like in Siege or Fortnite, your characters are exactly the same, but where as you gain more powerful gear, as the levels go on, or the looting goes on, you go against enemies. So say each player has a player level, right? And as they take out more enemies, get more stuff, that player level goes up. There's a matchmaking, and this is not once you hit the end game, as you go on in the game, there's a matchmaking where you can just go against people with even gear. And I think this is something that could completely change the game in looter shooters, make them a lot more fun. But it's kind of hard to do it with these games. Now, I know Anthem does have a multiplayer, at least from what I've heard, but that's later on in the game, and even though you don't have to go too far, there's not much to it, at least for now. And with The Division, just with how overpowered some of the gear you get, just the guns, I can understand that, but The Division 2, it's going to have to do some major altering. You can't just have the player with their gear they have, going up inside the multiplayer, but they're going to have to make some changes just with the amount of overpowered gear and stuff that you can get. And, I mean, if I was playing in The Division 2, I would definitely pick the crossbow class. Because Apocalypse, whatever, give me a crossbow, that has to be my favorite weapon ever invented. But in a gameplay standpoint, I can't see an explosive crossbow matching up against a grenade launcher, or a sniper matching up against a grenade launcher, which I think is a huge problem you have. And in Anthem, I don't see this as much of a problem. I think Anthem can easily make the transition from a primarily looter shooter game to a balance, an even balance of both looter shooter and a FPS multiplayer, or I guess third-person shooter, not first-person. I don't think they should make that drastic of a change, but I can see Anthem doing it and doing a really good job of it. While with The Division 2, it's just kind of harder to see that come into focus. And I think the main reason for that is in The Division 2, it's more open world. Now, I'm mainly comparing Anthem to Destiny. I'm thinking a multiplayer similar to that, except flying. And that would be awesome, going against flying enemies. But you kind of have that open world game. The Division 2 is a very open world game, but kind of comparing it to Rainbow Six Siege, a extremely strategical game, I can't see it really ever adding up to that, or really ever getting to that level of just pure strategy and fun that Rainbow has. So, I don't think there's much that these games can do, but I honestly, I want to see what the developers end up doing with them. If they weren't $60 both, I'd buy them, but I don't have money for days, and I'm already want to get some of that sick PewDiePie merch, which, subscribe to him. You've probably heard this a lot. You don't need to hear it from me, but I at least really don't want the underdog to lose, because I'm a big underdog guy. What can I say? But that's about it. I mean, if you stayed to the end of this through all my talking, whether you want to learn more about looter shooters, you value my opinion for some reason, or you just find my voice soothing, which is kind of creepy since most of you guys are my friends. But anyways, yeah, that's about it. I hope you see you in the next one. If you like this video, maybe you learned something, leave a like. I'm too small to be begging for this sort of stuff, but, I mean, hey, I gotta do what I gotta do. And also check out my friend Zapatak Gaming. He has a YouTube channel that he's starting way before this is ever gonna start. And just, he's doing pretty well, putting out some good videos, so check him out. And anyways, I'm the world's worst, but you can all me IRLs, and I'll see you in the next one.